This is going to be a tutorial on how to complete checkpoint 12 with the layer masks, a step above in terms of difficulty than checkpoint 11. You're going to need to download each of these three from your resources: Breakdance Guide, Blended Shape, and the White Wall. Save each of them, and you will open the white wall first into Photoshop and allow that to be the document that you work with. And you're going to also make sure that your finished checkpoint looks just as this, as we use layer masks. So just drag and drop the white wall straight onto Photoshop. And then you can drag and drop the others in there with it. And make the blended shape a little bit larger so it fits. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this guy in here as well, so just that we can see that I'm doing it right. Okay. So we need to mask this blended shape so it looks like it's going in and around this guy breakdancing here. So we need to get a active selection of the guy first, and when you command click a layer, it will automatically select everything that's on that layer. I'm going to go out to my blended shape, and I'm going to click on mask. This mask, add a layer mask, and everything that is inside this active selection here is going to remain visible on this blended shape layer, and everything else is going to be masked out in black. You'll see that here. You see here in the mask layer, all of the black is what is masked out, and the shape of the guy is what it remains visible. But I want this to be the inverse, so I'm going to hit Command I with that mask selected and inverse that selection. Now I can use this as a helpful resource here. I can go into my mask, click on my mask, get my black brush, make sure the hardness is at 100 and flow and opacity are up, and now I can start bringing in back this blended shape. So I want to paint with white because I've already masked it out behind him. So right here I'm going to paint and bring that part back, and then follow up here so it starts coming up again right here, goes over him here, over his arm, back behind there, and then it kind of comes back into here, like so. Alright, I don't need this anymore. Alright, so we painted it back in. The next stage of the process is, I think I missed a little bit right here. Next stage, we're going to go ahead and add our shadows real quick. So to add our shadows, we're going to go to our Breakdance Guide layer, and we're going to create a duplicate of it. You can hit Command J, or just click and bring that layer to the plus icon, and it'll create a duplicate. Make sure your auto select is turned off, and on the one that is the furthest below, you can take that and kind of pull it out and place it up here on the wall, and then double click on that layer. Brings up the layer style panel for this layer, and we're going to add a color overlay to it, and we're going to make sure it's black because it's going to be our shadow. And you can lower the opacity here some, but you don't want to do that because it's going to bring back in that original, so don't mess with the opacity there. Hit OK, and you can mess with the opacity now here, and make sure those bricks are showing through. If your layer is not a smart object, which ours currently is, we want it to be a smart object. So if it is not, you will right click on that layer and go to convert to smart object. That way, whenever we apply the blur filter, we will be able to go back in and change that filter if we want. The blur isn't going to be burned into our image. We'll be able to have continue to make edits and changes if we want. So go up to your filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and blur it at I'd say right about there. You can mess around with it till you feel like it's a good shadow effect. Hit OK. And we're not done yet. We're going to hit Command T or go up to Edit, Free Transform, create the bounding box here, and hold the Command button. And go to one of the edges. And now you can kind of twist and contort the way a shadow, shadows are kind of twisted and contorted. So something like that. Not bad. Hit Return, and the shadow's applied, and you can always move it around still. Now, we also need to create a shadow from his hand going to the wall and a little occlusion shadow underneath his hand. Both those will be fast and easy as well. So we're going to create a new layer for this occlusion shadow underneath his hand. Going to use our brush tool again. And let's set the flow down to something like 40, 30 something. Small brush, and you're just going to paint, right, a black shadow underneath his hand there. So that is pretty good and realistic. We're wanting to make this seamless. You don't want to do it with a hard brush. I did it okay with a hard brush. Just set the softness down and kind of maybe go over it a little bit again. All right, now we're going to need to create a new layer. One more time, get your polygonal lasso tool and create the shadow that would be extending to the wall from his hand and his body. Double click that, get your brush tool again, make it large, and just paint in there with black one time. And then Command D to deselect that selection. And just as we did with the other shadow, go ahead and make this a smart object. And we're going to go ahead and lower the opacity some. And we will apply the same blur, Gaussian blur. There we go. And you can move it as you might need to. And then the other step is to also add shadows onto him, and even as the blended shape. And this is where making good use of your selections in a bit more complicated way is going to start to happen. So, for instance, let's say I want to add a shadow. This blended shape right here is casting a shadow on his arm up here and down here as well. So I want to apply this on a new layer to remain non-destructive. And because I know I'm going to be painting on the guy, it'd be easiest just to get a quick selection of him. So I'm going to Command click that layer. Go back up to my layer I'm going to be working with my shadows on. Now if I use my brush, set to low, and if I start painting now, I'm also painting on top of that blended shape, which means I want to get that out of my selection. I don't want to paint on top of the blended shape. So since these are pretty straight lines, it'll be most easy just to use my polygonal lasso tool, and you can go up here to click on subtract from selection or hold your alt button. And I'm going to remove that part of the blended shape from my active selection so I don't accidentally paint on it. Here we go. Go back to my brush, set the opacity down a little bit more, and go ahead and add those shadows now. Just enough. And that will be the process that you will continue to do. So same thing here. Get my polygonal lasso tool, add shadows on some of that part of the arm and down here as well, but I don't want to get this polygonal tool in there. I mean that part of the blended shape. So I'm going to hold down Alt and remove that from my selection. There we go. Go back to make sure I'm still working on the same layer, and add some shadows there. Add some shadows down here. And then the same thing. I need to accidentally got rid of my selection, so I'll get Command click him again, and I will just continue that process. Here I want to put it on the shape and not on his arm, so I need an inverse of the selection I currently have. So I'll go up to Select, Inverse, and now when I paint, it's going on that blended shape. Or just as well, I can click on the blended shape and get an active selection, which is probably what I would do, and I would remove his arm here from this selection. So same thing as with the body, but this time I'm going to be removing the arm from the active selection rather than the blended shape. And since there are some curves in his arm, I'm going to go ahead and use the lasso tool, hold my Alt key. I would zoom in on this as well. Just quickly remove that from the active selection. Go back to my shadows layer, get my brush, lower opacity, and put some shadows on there, as if his arm is casting some shadows. And there we go. We need to create a little bit better selection there. But that is the whole process for the rest of him. Creating shadows on his body here, his pant legs, the shoe would be casting a bit of a shadow. And then the final step would be to use these adjustment layers again, whether it's vibrance or color balance or a photo filter to help tie in the two pictures, all of these elements together.